The neo-glass panels of the Institute of Precursor Artifacts gleamed in the pale light of Earth's second moon, a testament to humanity's ambitions, a century after first contact. Inside the building hummed, with the subtle vibrations of containment fields and environmental controls that protected relics from civilizations that had mastered the stars when humanity was still discovering fire. Night security guard Trey Voss walked his rounds through corridors lined with wonders that most people would never understand, let alone appreciate. Trey had grown comfortable with his insignificance. After 15 years as a systems engineer for the Galactic Council's technical division, he had learned that being overlooked was often preferable to being noticed. His transition to museum security had been a deliberate choice, trading the stress of interspecies technology integration for the peaceful predictability of watching over silent artifacts. The pay was adequate, the hours were quiet, and no one expected him to save the galaxy. The central exhibition hall stretched out before him like a cathedral of impossible geometry. Holographic displays floated beside pedestals, containing devices whose purposes remained mysteries, even to the Council's best xenoarchaeologists. But at the center of it all, on a raised dais, surrounded by a barrier of pure energy, stood the prize of the collection, the Caliburn Aegis. The armor appeared deceptively simple, its surface a deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Intricate patterns traced across its form, almost like circuitry, but organic in nature, as if grown rather than manufactured. For 5 years, representatives from each of the 12 member species of the Galactic Council had attempted to interface with it. Each had been rejected, sometimes violently. The Harland had sent their finest warriors. The Vex had offered their most advanced technomancers. The Mechan had tried everything from direct neural interfaces to quantum entanglement protocols. Nothing worked. Trey paused in his patrol, his reflection wavering in the containment field. He'd read the reports during his early days on the job, initially fascinated by the mystery. The armor had been discovered in a derelict precursor facility, a race so advanced they had supposedly transcended physical existence eons ago. Every piece of their technology was a treasure beyond calculation, and the Caliburn Aegis was considered their greatest achievement. Yet here it sat, rejecting anyone who tried to claim it. The security console chimed softly, displaying routine environmental readings. Trey glanced at the readout, noting nothing unusual. Temperature steady, containment field at full strength, no unauthorized access detected. Another quiet night in paradise. Then the lights flickered. Trey's hand moved instinctively to his comm device, but before he could trigger an alert, the museum's emergency systems engaged. Red warning lights bathed the hall in crimson, and a calm synthetic voice announced, "Containment breach detected in Central Exhibition. All personnel evacuate immediately." But there was no visible breach. The containment field around the Caliburn Aegis flickered, its blue barrier wavering like water. The armor itself had begun to glow, lines of brilliant green light pulsing across its surface, in rhythm with something resembling a heartbeat. Trey should have run. Every protocol demanded immediate evacuation when containment was compromised. But something held him in place, a feeling he couldn't quite name. The armor's glow grew brighter, and the containment field collapsed entirely. Without the barrier between them, Trey found himself stepping closer. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, but his body moved as if guided by an external force. The armor's pattern shifted, and for a moment he could swear he heard something like music emanating from within it. His fingers brushed the armor's surface. The world exploded into sensation. Energy coursed through Trey's body, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. The armor flowed like liquid metal, wrapping around him with impossible speed and precision. Systems activated in his mind, displays and readouts, appearing in his vision as if his eyes had become computer screens. Connection established. A voice spoke directly into his thoughts, neither male nor female, but carrying the weight of millennia. Initiating compatibility assessment. Images flashed through Trey's consciousness: battles fought across galaxies, civilizations rising and falling, technologies beyond imagination. He saw the precursors in their final days, not as ascended beings, but as a dying race, desperately trying to preserve their legacy. Assessment complete. Subject exhibits requisite qualities: humility, adaptability, resistance to corruption by power. Integration proceeding. The armor settled around him perfectly, as if it had been tailored specifically for his frame. Systems came online in sequence: enhanced strength, accelerated reflexes, environmental sensors that made the world burst into new spectrums of detail. He could feel the armor's consciousness alongside his own, ancient and vast but curious about this strange new partnership. "Greetings, Trey Voss," the voice said. "I am the Caliburn Aegis, and I have been waiting a very long time to meet you." Before Trey could fully process what had happened, alarms began blaring throughout the museum. The main entrance exploded inward, revealing armed figures in environmental suits, representing various council species. Leading them was a Harland warrior, her 4 arms wielding weapons that hummed with destructive energy. "Surrender the armor, human," she commanded her translator, rendering her hissing native tongue into crude but understandable speech. "By right of salvage and superior claim, it belongs to the Harland hegemony." "I'm afraid I must object," came another voice. A Vex delegation materialized from cloaking fields, their crystalline forms refracting the emergency lighting into dancing rainbows. "The Vex Collective has prior claim based on our extensive research contributions." More groups emerged from various entrances: Mechan cyborgs, Korath warriors, Centauri diplomats backed by heavily armed guards. Representatives of nearly every council species had converged on the museum simultaneously, each claiming right to the armor. Trey stood frozen in the center of the chaos, acutely aware that he had become the most valuable object in the galaxy. The armor's systems were already analyzing the threats, calculating tactical responses with frightening efficiency. "They cannot hear reason while blinded by greed," Caliburn observed in his mind. "Shall we demonstrate why their ancestors feared this armor?" "Wait," Trey said both aloud and mentally. "I'm not a warrior. I'm just a security guard. Can't we talk about this?" The Harland leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Talk? You are human. Your species has existed in this galaxy for barely a century. What could you possibly offer that we cannot take?" The question stung, touching every insecurity Trey had carried since humanity's admission to the Council. Humans were the newest species, the least advanced, the ones everyone else barely tolerated. He had felt that condescension his entire career, the subtle dismissal, the assumption that humans were primitive children playing at galactic civilization. But the armor that had rejected every other species had chosen him. "Maybe," Trey said, his voice growing stronger. "That's exactly why I'm qualified." Power surged through the armor systems. Trey felt his abilities expand exponentially. He could perceive every being in the room, track their movements, predict their actions. But more than that, he could sense the building systems, the environmental controls, the very air circulation. When the first shots were fired, Trey was already moving. The armor's enhanced reflexes carried him through a storm of energy blasts and projectile rounds. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, just to avoid being hurt himself. But Caliburn had other ideas. Defensive systems activated, creating barriers of hardened energy that deflected attacks back toward their sources. The museum's automated defenses came online, under the armor's control, non-lethal, but effective, filling the air with suppression fields and sonic disruptors. In the midst of the chaos, Trey noticed something that chilled him: a figure watching from the shadows, making no move to join the battle. Human, but wearing robes that seemed to shift and blur when observed directly. The figure caught his eye and nodded toward a service corridor, then disappeared. "Curious," Caliburn noted. "That individual registers as both human and something else." Following his instincts, Trey used the armor's enhanced speed to break away from the battle, racing toward the corridor, where the figure had indicated. Behind him, the various species continued fighting among themselves, apparently forgetting about him in their desire to claim dominance over each other. The corridor led to the museum's research levels areas, normally restricted to staff and approved scholars. Trey had been down here countless times during routine patrols, but something felt different now. The armor's sensors were picking up energy signatures that shouldn't have existed. He found the figure waiting in a laboratory filled with precursor artifacts. Up close, Trey could see that she was indeed human, but something about her seemed to exist slightly outside normal space-time. Her features were sharp and intelligent, her age impossible to determine. "Dr. Aaron, I presume," she said, extending a hand. "Xenoarchaeologist specialist in precursor technology, and as of tonight, your unlikely ally." Trey shook her hand cautiously. "How do you know who I am? And how did you get down here without triggering security?" Dr. Aaron smiled, and for a moment her form shimmered. "Because Trey Voss, I've been waiting for this day far longer than you might imagine. The Caliburn Aegis wasn't just armor, it was a test. And you're the first being in 5,000 years to pass it." She gestured to the artifacts around them, and Trey realized they weren't just displays. They were active, glowing with the same subtle energy as the armor. "The precursors didn't disappear," Dr. Aaron continued. They integrated themselves into their technology, becoming something new. But before the transformation, they created the Caliburn Aegis as a final gift to whoever would prove worthy of their legacy. Someone who would use power wisely, who wouldn't be corrupted by it. Trey felt pieces clicking together in his mind. "You're not just a human archaeologist, are you?" "I am and I'm not," she admitted. "I'm what you might call a cultural observer, sent by the Precursor Collective, to monitor the armor and evaluate any potential candidates. In your species terminology, I suppose you could call me an anthropologist studying the development of younger civilizations." The implications hit Trey like a physical blow. "You've been watching us, the whole time since first contact." And long before. Humanity intrigued the Precursor Collective, precisely because of what the other species see as weaknesses. Your adaptability, your tendency toward cooperation despite surface conflicts, your ability to find novel solutions to ancient problems. These were the qualities the armor was designed to seek. Alarms echoed from above, growing more urgent. Dr. Aaron moved to a console and began activating systems Trey hadn't even known existed. "I'm afraid our conversation will have to be brief," she said. "The species fighting upstairs have called in reinforcements. This building will soon be under siege by 3 full battle fleets. We need to get you and the armor somewhere safe while you learn to properly interface with it." "I never asked for this," Trey protested. "I just wanted a quiet life, no complications, no responsibility." Dr. Aaron paused in her work and looked at him seriously. "That's exactly why you were chosen. Power sought is power abused. Power accepted reluctantly is power used wisely. The precursors learned this lesson at great cost." She activated a transport pad that definitely hadn't been there during Trey's previous patrols. "This will take you to a sanctuary where you can learn what you need to know. But Trey, understand this, the armor has chosen you, but the burden is yours. The legacy of an entire civilization now rests in your hands." As the transport engaged, the last thing Trey saw was Dr. Aaron facing the laboratory entrance. Her form beginning to shift and change, becoming something simultaneously more and less than human as she prepared to face whatever was coming down those corridors. Trey materialized in a space that defied easy description. It seemed to be both indoors and outdoors simultaneously, with walls that might have been made of crystallized starlight and a sky that showed the swirling patterns of distant galaxies. The air itself hummed with energy, and Trey could feel the armor responding to the environment, its systems adapting and recalibrating. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Caliburn said in his mind. "This is a pocket dimension created by the precursors as a repository of knowledge and a training ground for their chosen successors. Here, time moves differently, and you will learn what you need to know. Structures rose from the ground around him, forming training areas, laboratories, and what appeared to be a vast library whose books were made of light. But before Trey could begin exploring, he noticed he wasn't alone. A figure approached from a grove of trees that definitely hadn't been there moments before. As it drew closer, Trey saw it was one of the Harland attackers from the museum, but something was different. This one moved without aggression, and the armor's threat assessment remained passive. "I am Ken," the Harland said, its forearms spread in a gesture of peace. "I followed you through the transport before it closed. I came not to fight, but to understand." Trey tensed, ready to flee or fight, but Caliburn's voice remained calm. "This one speaks truth. Her intentions are not hostile." Ken continued, settling into a posture that indicated respectful attention in Harlan culture. "My people have been obsessed with claiming the armor for generations. We believed it would make us the dominant species in the council. But watching you, seeing how the armor chose you over our finest warriors, it has made me question our assumptions. You're not angry that a human was chosen over your people. Angry, perhaps at first, but curious more than angry. The Harlan value strength above all else, but there are different kinds of strength. Perhaps we have been blind to the strength that comes from restraint, from choosing not to use power, simply because you possess it." Over the following period, time really did seem fluid in the sanctuary. Trey learned to work with the armor's systems, under Caliburn's patient guidance. He discovered he could interface with precursor technology throughout the dimension, accessing vast databases of knowledge from across the galaxy. More surprisingly, he learned to appreciate Ken's unique perspective. The Harland warrior had a tactical mind that complemented Trey's more intuitive approach to problem-solving. Together, they began to understand the true scope of what the armor represented. The precursors weren't just preserving their technology, Trey realized during one training session. They were creating a bridge between civilizations. The armor isn't meant to make one species dominant over the others. It's meant to help them work together. Ken's anterior limbs rippled in the Harland equivalent of nodding. "My people have always believed that strength comes from standing alone, from proving superiority over others. But observing your approach to the armor's challenges has shown me another path. Strength can also come from unity, from combining the best of all species." Their philosophical discussions were interrupted by an unexpected arrival. A small, spherical robot materialized in the center of the sanctuary, its surface covered in blinking lights and sensor arrays. It hovered at eye level, emitting a complex series of musical tones. "Pulse," Trey exclaimed, recognizing the museum's maintenance robot. "How did you get here?" The robot's response was another musical phrase, this one, somehow conveying urgency and concern. Caliburn translated, "It appears our mechanical friend followed the energy signature of your transport. It carries a message." Pulse projected a holographic display showing scenes of destruction. The museum was gone, reduced to rubble. Above Earth's atmosphere, 3 massive fleets faced each other in a tense standoff: Harlan Vex and a coalition of other Council species. Smaller displays showed similar confrontations throughout Council space. "They're going to war," Ken said, her limbs expressing deep distress. "Over the armor. Over you." The balance of power the Council maintained was always fragile, Caliburn observed. The introduction of precursor technology to any one species would inevitably upset that balance. This was foreseen. Trey felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, like a physical thing. "So what do we do? I can't let them destroy each other over something I never asked for." Pulse chimed again, this time, projecting detailed tactical displays of the Council fleets. But embedded in the data were other signals patterns that Trey couldn't quite make sense of. "That's interesting," Caliburn noted. "Your mechanical friend appears to be carrying more than just surveillance data. There are precursor information signatures embedded in its memory core." When they connected Pulse to the sanctuary systems, the results were staggering. The little robot had been absorbing and storing fragments of precursor data from throughout the museum for years, accumulating a vast library of partially decoded information. "I know this robot," Ken said suddenly. "It was part of a joint research project between our species 5 years ago. My clutchmate Varl worked on its behavioral programming. But this is far beyond what it should be capable of." As they delved deeper into Pulse's data stores, a disturbing picture emerged. The robot hadn't just been collecting random information. It had been seeking specific data patterns, as if guided by an unknown intelligence. And now, analyzing those patterns with the Sanctuary's resources, Trey began to understand. The precursors didn't just disappear, he said, pieces falling into place. They're still here, distributed throughout their technology, and they've been guiding events preparing for this moment. Caliburn's response carried what might have been amusement. "Correct. We are not mere recordings or artificial intelligences. We are the precursors in a sense, though changed by our integration with our technology. The armor was our gift to the species who would prove ready to inherit our legacy." "But why humans?" Ken asked. "No disrespect, Trey, but your species is the youngest, the least technologically advanced." "Perhaps that's exactly why," Trey replied, understanding flooding through him. "We haven't had time to develop the prejudices, the rigid thinking patterns that have locked the older species into their roles. We're still adaptable, still learning." The Sanctuary's systems chimed with an incoming signal. Dr. Aaron appeared via holographic projection, but her image was distorted, disrupted by interference. "Trey, you need to get to Nexus Station immediately," she said, her voice cutting in and out. "The Council species aren't just posturing anymore. They've taken hostages from each other's homeworlds. If someone doesn't intervene soon, this will escalate beyond any ability to control." The projection flickered and died. Ken's limbs moved in agitation. "Nexus Station is in the Proxima system at the intersection of all major trade routes. If fighting breaks out there, the entire galactic economy collapses," Trey finished. "And that's just the beginning. How many people die in a galactic war?" "Billions," Caliburn said simply. "Trillions. Entire species could be driven to extinction. This was the fate the precursors hoped to prevent by creating the armor." Trey stood, decision crystallizing. "Then we go to Nexus Station, all of us. We find a way to stop this before it gets worse." "We?" Ken asked. "You said you wanted to understand a different kind of strength. Here's your chance to help demonstrate it." The journey to Nexus Station took them through regions of space Trey had only heard about in stellar navigation courses. The armor provided mobility beyond anything he had imagined, allowing him to interface with the Sanctuary's precursor ship and guide it through hyperspace corridors that cut travel time to mere hours. Nexus Station was exactly as he had pictured it, a massive construction that looked like someone had built a city inside a giant metal flower, with docking arms extending in all directions to accommodate ships from dozens of different species. But something was wrong. Instead of the usual bustling traffic, only 3 groups of ships were present, the war fleets of the major council factions. "Scans indicate the station is on emergency lockdown," Caliburn reported. "Most civilian personnel have been evacuated, but approximately 10,000 beings remain trapped in the central commercial district." "Hostages," Ken concluded grimly. "Each faction probably grabbed citizens from rival species as insurance." As they approached, communication signals flooded their ship. Demands for surrender from Harlan vessels, warnings to stay away from Vex broadcasters, diplomatic overtures from smaller coalition forces. Everyone wanted to talk to the human in the precursor armor. "This ends now," Trey decided. "Caliburn, can you get us onto the station without being detected?" "Certainly. The armor's stealth capabilities are beyond current detection methods. But Trey, you cannot hope to negotiate with all these factions. They see only power and advantage. Your very presence validates their belief that the armor can be claimed through force. Then I won't try to negotiate. I'll give them something else to think about." Ken's limbs rippled with what might have been approval. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind?" Trey smiled, and for the first time since the armor had chosen him, it felt right. I'm going to show them what the armor was really designed for. They infiltrated Nexus Station through service tunnels that Pulse mapped, using the station's own maintenance systems. The little robot had become an invaluable member of their team, its ability to interface with different technological systems, providing access that would have been impossible otherwise. The Central Commercial District was a maze of shops, restaurants, and entertainment venues spread across multiple levels. Under normal circumstances, it would have been crowded with beings from across the galaxy. Now it was patrolled by armed groups, wearing the insignia of different council species, each guarding their section of trapped civilians. The situation is worse than reported, Ken observed, as they surveyed the district from a hidden alcove. I count at least 4 different faction groups, each with significant civilian populations under guard. Any violence here will result in massive casualties. Trey watched the patrols, noting their routines and positions. But he wasn't planning violence. The armor's systems had given him access to the station's environmental controls, its communication networks, its entertainment systems. An idea was forming, crazy, but possibly effective. Caliburn, do you remember what you showed me about precursor cultural practices, their ceremonies? Of course. They placed great emphasis on the integration of technology with artistic expression, believing that beauty and function were inseparable aspects of creation. And their music, you said it could interface directly with their technology. Correct. Precursor music was not merely aesthetic but functional, a programming language that could control environmental systems, modify material properties, even influence biological systems in benign ways. Trey turned to Pulse. Think you can help me access the station's entertainment network? All of it throughout the entire complex. The robot's lights blinked in what had become recognizable as enthusiasm. It extended various interface probes and connected to the nearest access panel. Trey, Ken said cautiously, "What are you planning?" "Something that's never been tried before. Something that might just be insane enough to work." The next phase of their plan required splitting up a decision that made Ken's limbs twitch with anxiety. While she and Pulse worked to establish connections with the station systems, Trey began moving through the district, using the armor's stealth capabilities to remain unseen. He observed each group of hostages, each faction of guards, each species represented. Harland warriors maintained discipline through rigid hierarchy. Vex crystalline beings communicated through harmonic resonances that created light patterns on their surfaces. Mechan cyborgs interfaced directly with station systems. Korath reptilians moved in pack formations that spoke of ancient hunting instincts. Each species had its own cultural markers, its own way of understanding the world. But they also had something in common. They all responded to beauty, to art, to expressions of creativity that transcended mere function. "I think I understand now," Trey said to Caliburn as he completed his reconnaissance. The precursors didn't just want someone to carry on their technology. They wanted someone who could help all these different species learn to work together. The armor isn't a weapon or a tool of dominance, it's a bridge. And you believe music can serve as that bridge? Not just music. Music combined with environmental control, with light, with technology that responds to artistic expression. Something that speaks to every species at once, in ways they can all understand. When Trey rejoined Ken and Pulse, he found them surrounded by interface cables and projection equipment they had somehow acquired from various maintenance stores throughout the station. "The station's systems are more integrated than I expected," Ken reported. Pulse has identified connection points throughout the complex that can channel both audio and visual displays. But Trey, even with the armor's capabilities attempting to control systems on this scale, "It's dangerous," Trey acknowledged. "The energy requirements alone could overload my nervous system. But Caliburn says the armor can handle it, and someone needs to try something before this situation explodes into open warfare." He began connecting himself to the jury-rig system, feeling the armor's interfaces extending throughout the station, like nervous system tendrils. The sensation was overwhelming at first, like trying to think with a billion different minds simultaneously. But gradually, with Caliburn's guidance, patterns emerged. He could sense every being on the station, their locations, their emotional states, the tension that permeated the air like electricity. The various faction leaders were growing increasingly impatient, their communications growing more heated by the hour. Soon, someone would make a move that could not be taken back. "It's time," Trey said. "Ken Pulse, get to the central communications hub. When I start, I'll need you to make sure no one can cut the connections." Ken's limbs moved in a gesture of determination. "I understand. We will not let you attempt this alone." As his companions departed for their positions, Trey took a deep breath and began to reach out through the station systems. The armor's power flowed through the network, bringing dormant systems online, activating environmental controls that hadn't been used in decades. Then softly at first, the music began. It started as a simple melody, something that might have been composed by any species, but somehow carried elements familiar to all of them. The station's sound systems carried it throughout the complex, while environmental controls began to adjust lighting in harmony with the tones. Harland warriors paused in their patrols, their forearms moving unconsciously to rhythms that echoed their people's war dances. Vex crystals began to resonate their surfaces, creating light patterns that complemented the audio. Mech and cyborgs found their bionic components responding to frequencies that aligned with their technological rhythms. But Trey wasn't just playing music. He was painting with light sculpting, with atmosphere creating a symphony that engaged every sense. Holographic displays throughout the station began showing abstract patterns that somehow spoke to deep cultural memories from every species. "Remarkable," Caliburn observed. "You are creating something entirely new, yet built from elements each species recognizes as their own." The music grew more complex, incorporating not just melodies, but the mathematical harmonies that Vex found beautiful, the polyrhythmic structures that spoke to Harland, martial traditions, the harmonic progressions that resonated with Mechan neural networks. Environmental systems created breezes, scented with compounds that triggered pleasant memories in various biological species, while temperature gradients formed patterns that some species could actually see. Throughout the station, beings stopped what they were doing and looked up. Guards lowered their weapons, not in surrender, but in wonder. Civilians emerged from hiding places drawn by something that spoke to parts of their souls they had forgotten existed. But the real test came when the faction leaders themselves began to respond. Through the station's security networks, Trey watched as hardened military commanders found themselves caught up in the performance. A Harlan general began moving in a pattern that was part war dance, part peaceful greeting. A Vex coordinator's crystalline form created lights that painted the walls of their command center with colors of joy and hope. "They're listening," Trey whispered, awe filling his voice. "They're all listening." The music reached its crescendo, and Trey pushed the armor's capabilities to their absolute limit. For one perfect moment, every system on the station responded in harmony. Light, sound, temperature, air pressure, even gravity fields fluctuated in patterns that created a unified artistic expression, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Throughout the station, beings stood motionless, processing what they had just experienced. Then slowly, something unprecedented began to happen. Weapons were lowered. Guards stepped aside. Civilians who had been hostages walked freely between different faction zones, no longer prisoners, but witnesses to something greater than the conflicts that had divided them. Trey collapsed the armor systems, automatically disengaging from the station's network as he reached the limits of his endurance. But as Ken and Pulse reached him, he could see through the station's cameras that his gambit had worked. The faction leaders were talking. Not negotiating, not threatening, but actually communicating with each other as if seeing their counterparts as real beings for the first time. "You did it," Ken said, her forearms gently helping him to his feet. "You actually did it." "We did it," Trey corrected. "All of us. The armor, the station systems, pulses, network connections, your tactical planning. This only worked because we combined everyone's strengths." And that, Caliburn said in his mind, is precisely the lesson the precursors hoped someone would learn. The aftermath of what media outlets quickly dubbed the Nexus Harmony transformed galactic politics in ways no one had anticipated. The species leaders who had been ready for war found themselves engaged in the most productive diplomatic discussions in Council history. Within days, a new agreement emerged. Rather than fighting over access to precursor technology, the Council would establish a joint research initiative with shared benefits for all member species. Trey, as the chosen bearer of the Caliburn Aegis, would serve as both guardian of the technology and facilitator of its ethical application. But the real change was deeper than politics. The Harmony performance had been recorded and broadcast throughout Council space. For the first time, beings from different species began to see art and beauty in each other's cultures. Exchange programs flourished. Collaborative projects that had been unthinkable became commonplace. 6 months later, Trey stood in the newly constructed Nexus Institute for Cooperative Research, watching, through a vast window, as ships from a dozen different species docked at the station's expanded facilities. The armor had become so integrated with his physiology that it now appeared as a simple, elegant suit, rather than obvious battle gear. Caliburn's presence in his mind had evolved from a separate voice to what felt like an extension of his own thoughts. "The quarterly report is encouraging," Dr. Aaron said, approaching with a data tablet. She had officially revealed her nature as a precursor descendant after the Harmony event, serving as an advisor and cultural liaison between the ancient civilization and the modern council. Technology transfer programs are ahead of schedule, and there have been no attempts to weaponize precursor discoveries. Yet Trey added, his natural pessimism still intact, despite everything that had changed. "Yet," she agreed. "But the oversight protocols you developed are holding. The requirement that all precursor technology research be conducted by multi-species teams has prevented any single faction from gaining unfair advantage." Ken joined them, her movements now relaxed in a way that had been impossible when Trey first met her. She had become his unofficial deputy, helping to coordinate research teams and mediate disputes when cultural differences threatened to derail cooperation. "The Harlan Council has approved the proposal for the new colony world," she reported. "They're calling it Harmony in honor of the Nexus event. It will be the first planet settled by mixed species populations as equal partners, rather than temporary cooperation." "Pulse has been working on a song for the dedication ceremony," Trey said, gesturing to where the small robot hovered near a console. "Apparently, it's learned to compose music that incorporates mathematical principles from 7 different species." Pulse chimed proudly, projecting a complex holographic notation that combined musical staffs with geometric patterns and color spectrums. "There's something else," Dr. Aaron said, hesitation in her voice. "The deep space monitoring stations have detected signals from beyond the galactic rim. Structured signals. We think we may have made contact with other galactic communities." Trey felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but it was tempered now by experience and confidence. More species to integrate into the Council, more potential conflicts to navigate. "More opportunities," Ken suggested. "More perspectives to learn from." The precursors had theorized about other galactic civilizations, Caliburn added in Trey's mind. "If they exist, and if they are anything like the species here, they will have their own conflicts, their own need for bridges between cultures." Trey looked out at the ships docking at the station, each representing a species that had been ready to go to war less than a year ago. Now, they worked together, not perfectly, not without friction, but with genuine commitment to cooperation. "I suppose," he said finally, "if the armor could transform a museum security guard into someone who facilitates galactic harmony, it can probably handle whatever's coming from beyond the rim." As if in response to his words, the armor's systems hummed with quiet readiness. Deep in the station's research levels, precursor technology interfaced with instruments from a dozen different species, all working toward common goals. And somewhere in the vast spaces between galaxies, signals traveled, that would soon bring new challenges and new opportunities for growth. Trey Voss, former security guard current keeper of an ancient legacy, smiled as he watched a mixed crew of young beings from 6 different species work together to design a new type of exploration vessel. The armor had chosen him not because he was the strongest or the smartest or the most ambitious, but because he understood that true strength came from bringing others together. The precursors had left behind more than technology. They had left a path toward a future where the galaxy's countless species could work as one, stronger together than any could be alone. And as Trey prepared for whatever came next, he knew that path would continue to unfold, one shared moment of understanding at a time. "Caliburn," he said quietly, "I think I'm finally beginning to understand what you meant when you said the armor was a test. And what understanding have you reached?" "It wasn't testing whether I was worthy of the power. It was testing whether I was ready to help others discover their own worthiness." In his mind, Caliburn's response carried something that might have been approval, or perhaps it was simply satisfaction at a lesson well learned. Around them, the galaxy continued to spin, filled with countless species, learning what it meant to harmonize their differences into something greater than the sum of their parts. The armor that had rejected every alien had found exactly what it was looking for in humanity, not because humans were superior, but because they were still young enough to believe that differences were strengths to be celebrated rather than obstacles to be overcome. And as Trey settled into his role as keeper of the precursor legacy, he knew that the most important discoveries still lay ahead, waiting to be made not by any single species, but by all of them working together. The future, like the harmony he had created at Nexus Station, would be composed of countless different voices, joining together in something beautiful, complex, and utterly unique. And Trey Voss, secured guard, turned guardian of galactic unity, would help conduct that grand symphony for as long as the armor would let him. In the end, the greatest power was not the ability to dominate others, but the wisdom to elevate them. The Caliburn Aegis had waited 5,000 years to find someone who understood that truth. And in a quiet, unassuming human who had never sought glory or power, it had found exactly what it was looking for.